Ladies and gentlemen, life has a way of introducing us to all kinds of people. Some are a source of strength, kindness, and wisdom, while others, well, they come into our lives with a different kind of energy. Toxic people, those who drain our spirit, manipulate our emotions, or seek to diminish our light, can seem like unavoidable forces. But here's the thing: we have the power to decide how we show up, especially when dealing with these individuals. Let me share with you today how smart people, those who understand their worth, their energy, and their emotional boundaries, treat toxic people. It's not about retaliation. It's not about sinking to their level. It's about rising above, protecting our peace, and stepping into our strength. When we think of boundaries, many of us may picture walls, something that separates us from others. However, smart people understand that boundaries are not about shutting people out. They are about creating a space where respect, peace, and self-care can thrive. Boundaries are an essential part of emotional health and well-being, particularly when dealing with toxic individuals. Setting clear boundaries is not a simple task. It requires a deep understanding of who you are and what you are willing to tolerate. Toxic people often test our limits. They will push and pull, manipulate and control until they find the cracks in our armor. But when we set boundaries, we say, this is where I stand. This is what I will accept, and this is what I will not. It's a statement of self-worth, a declaration that our emotional space is sacred. Setting boundaries means becoming aware of your limits and making the conscious decision not to overextend yourself for anyone, not for approval, not for fear of conflict, and not because you feel obligated. Boundaries are often misunderstood as something negative or aggressive, but in truth, they are one of the most loving things you can do for yourself. They allow you to preserve your energy, protect your peace, and stay grounded in your own truth. A smart person does not wait for the perfect moment to set boundaries. They set them as soon as the need arises. In many cases, we might find ourselves in situations with toxic individuals where we hesitate to speak up, fearing that we will upset them or cause a rift. However, in doing so, we allow our own needs to be trampled over in favor of their comfort. Smart people know that their needs matter just as much as anyone else's, and they don't shy away from asserting them. Setting boundaries might look like saying no when you need to, even when you feel guilty. It's about choosing your peace over people-pleasing. It might mean walking away from a conversation or relationship that doesn't align with your values or sense of self-worth. It's about recognizing when something feels off and having the courage to step back and reassess the situation. There's also a level of honesty that comes with setting boundaries. Smart people understand that they don't have to make excuses for their boundaries. They don't need to apologize for taking care of themselves. It's about being clear and direct without being harsh. If a toxic person tries to cross the line, a smart person will gently but firmly redirect the conversation or remove themselves from the situation. I'm not available for this kind of energy, they might say. Or, I'm not engaging in this conversation any longer. It's about standing firm in your sense of worth, even if others don't understand. But boundaries are not just about saying no to others. They're also about saying yes to ourselves, saying yes to our needs, our time, our mental and emotional health. A smart person knows that by setting boundaries, they are creating space to prioritize what matters most. Whether it's making time for a hobby, spending time with people who lift them up, or simply taking time for rest and self-care, boundaries ensure that there's room for these vital aspects of life. In practice, setting boundaries might also mean limiting contact with toxic individuals. Sometimes this might even mean distancing yourself from family or friends, which can feel daunting. But smart people understand that true love and respect often require space and distance, especially when toxicity is present. They don't allow anyone to monopolize their time, energy, or emotional bandwidth without clear mutual respect. And here's the most crucial part: setting boundaries is an ongoing practice. They are not one-time actions, but daily choices. Every time a toxic person attempts to engage in harmful behaviors, a smart person is reminded of the need to reaffirm their boundaries. Whether it's a subtle manipulation or a blatant disregard for their well-being, smart people are constantly reinforcing the walls of self-respect and emotional safety. Boundaries, then, are not about creating separation for the sake of division. They are about creating healthy space in which mutual respect, kindness, and love can flourish. And by consistently and consciously setting boundaries, smart people cultivate a life filled with respect for themselves and others. One of the greatest challenges when dealing with toxic people is not allowing their words or actions to affect our sense of self. Toxic individuals often manipulate, criticize, and belittle, using their words and actions to provoke a reaction. But smart people, those who have cultivated emotional resilience, know that what others say or do says more about them than it does about you. They understand the fundamental truth that toxic behavior is a reflection of the toxic person's inner turmoil, not an indictment of who you are. The first step in not taking things personally is recognizing that we cannot control other people's behavior. Toxic people, by nature, will often operate from a place of fear, insecurity, or unresolved pain. Their actions are frequently a defense mechanism to shield themselves from vulnerability. When they lash out, it's often because they are trying to maintain control, push others down, or project their own frustrations onto someone else. Smart people see this. They don't internalize toxic behavior as a reflection of their own worth. Instead, they create the space to recognize that the toxicity they're encountering is a product of the other person's struggles, not their own deficiencies. It's not about you. It's not about your abilities, your intelligence, or your worth as a human being. It's a reaction to their inner chaos. For instance, imagine a situation where a toxic person attacks your character, perhaps questioning your abilities or judging your decisions. In these moments, it's easy to spiral into self-doubt or feel like you need to defend yourself. But a smart person knows that responding to this behavior by engaging in defense or retaliation only fuels the cycle of negativity. They understand that by reacting, they allow the toxic person's perception of them to define their emotional state. Instead, they step back, breathe, and evaluate the situation through the lens of perspective. Does this person's opinion truly reflect my truth? No. And with that understanding, they can separate the external from the internal. This practice also requires emotional awareness. It's not enough to simply say, I won't take it personally. Smart people take the time to understand their own emotional responses. They acknowledge when they are hurt, angry, or upset, but they don't allow those emotions to override their capacity for reflection. When faced with a toxic individual's criticism or negativity, they pause, take a moment, and ask themselves, is this something I truly believe about myself? Or is this an echo of someone else's pain? For example, a toxic person may criticize your efforts or belittle your dreams. It might sting in the moment, but smart people don't let those words define their self-worth. They remember that what others think of them is none of their business. They own their self-worth regardless of someone else's opinion. Their sense of value is rooted in their own internal compass, not the shifting winds of external judgment. Another aspect of not taking things personally is about having the ability to disengage emotionally from the toxicity. Smart people develop an emotional detachment from the person's negative behavior. They might acknowledge the person's actions as being hurtful or inappropriate, but they don't allow those actions to dictate their emotional state. They know that emotions are contagious, and they refuse to let someone else's toxicity infect their own peace. It's as if they've built an emotional filter. They can hear the words, see the actions, but they don't let it penetrate their peace. They don't internalize it. They refuse to let someone else's negativity define their experience. This doesn't mean that smart people are cold or indifferent. It doesn't mean they don't care about how others perceive them. It simply means that they have learned how to care about themselves more than they care about someone else's toxic words or actions. They understand that to take something personally is to give away their power. By refusing to take things personally, they regain control over their emotional well-being and empower themselves to make decisions based on their own standards, not someone else's projections. It's also important to note that not taking things personally doesn't mean ignoring the reality of the situation. Smart people still hold others accountable for their actions. They may set boundaries, communicate their feelings, or choose to distance themselves from toxic people, but they do so with clarity and without emotional reactivity. They don't let their emotional attachment to being right or heard cloud their judgment. Instead, they make decisions based on what is best for their mental and emotional health. There's a remarkable power in this approach. It frees smart people from the emotional roller coaster that toxic individuals seek to create. Rather than getting caught up in the drama, they remain anchored in their own truth. They don't feel the need to explain, defend, or justify themselves. And as a result, they move through life with a quiet, unwavering confidence that comes from knowing who they are independent of anyone else's opinion. In essence, smart people learn to not take things personally because they recognize that they cannot change how others behave, but they can choose how they respond. They take ownership of their emotions and create space to see things from a broader perspective. They know that when you allow someone else's toxicity to define you, you give away your peace. And smart people refuse to do that. Instead, they hold their peace, stand firm in their truth, and let the opinions of others fall where they may, because at the end of the day, they know their worth. Energy is one of our most precious resources. It is not something that can be replenished easily once it's drained, and it flows through everything we do, think, and feel. Smart people understand that in order to live a life of purpose, clarity, and fulfillment, they must be intentional about how and where they invest their energy. When dealing with toxic people, the idea of protecting one's energy becomes crucial. Toxic individuals, by their very nature, feed off negativity, drama, and discord. They thrive on draining the emotional and mental energy of others, often through manipulation, guilt, or simply by creating a constant state of unrest. They are energy vampires, and unless we set up firm defenses, they will continue to siphon off our vitality until there's little left for ourselves or the things that truly matter. Protecting your energy isn't just about avoiding toxic people, though. That is a key part of it. It's also about creating a lifestyle and mindset that fosters resilience, positivity, and balance. Smart people are not passive about this. They are actively engaged in protecting their energy every day in every interaction. One of the hallmarks of emotional intelligence and maturity is the ability to approach toxic behavior with compassion rather than judgment. Smart people understand that while they are not obligated to tolerate toxic actions or remain in unhealthy situations, they also recognize the deeper complexities that often drive such behavior. They know that every toxic person has a story, a history, and wounds that are fueling their actions. Rather than responding with condemnation or harsh criticism, they choose to respond with empathy and understanding. This doesn't mean excusing or enabling toxic behavior. Compassion doesn't equate to putting up with mistreatment. It simply means recognizing that toxic behavior often stems from unresolved pain, insecurity, or trauma. Smart people know that people act from their own limitations, their own fears, or their own experiences. When a toxic person lashes out, it's often because they are struggling with something internally that they are unable to process or express in healthy ways. In these moments, smart people acknowledge that the toxic person's behavior is a reflection of their inner turmoil, not necessarily a reflection of who the individual is at their core. For example, a toxic person might lash out at you during a stressful time, using harsh words or manipulative tactics to regain a sense of control. A smart person, rather than reacting defensively or attacking back, will pause and consider the source of the behavior. What might this person be going through? What fears or insecurities might be driving this outburst? By considering these questions, they can respond with compassion rather than condemning the person for their behavior. Compassion involves seeing the humanity in others, even when their actions are hurtful or unjust. It requires stepping outside of your own emotional reactions and understanding that everyone has their own battles. It allows for the recognition that the toxic person may be acting out of their own suffering. Smart people with their high level of emotional intelligence realize that compassion doesn't mean allowing toxic individuals to continue their harmful behavior, but it means recognizing that their behavior is rooted in deeper struggles. It creates a space where you can separate the person from the behavior and avoid dehumanizing them. However, the practice of compassion doesn't mean sacrificing your own boundaries or self-respect. A smart person can show compassion by refusing to engage in harmful dynamics while still understanding that the toxic person's behavior is a result of personal struggles, not necessarily malice or a deliberate attack. Compassion is about holding space for the possibility that people can change, but not tolerating their toxic behavior in the present moment. It's about being kind enough to distance yourself, but wise enough to understand that their behavior is not a personal affront, it's an expression of their own pain. When a toxic individual acts out, smart people don't immediately jump to anger, frustration, or judgment. Instead, they first take a moment to understand the situation. They may even ask themselves, what is this person afraid of? Or what part of themselves are they trying to protect? By considering the root of the behavior, smart people are better able to diffuse the tension and keep their own energy intact. They know that responding with judgment or condemnation only exacerbates the situation. It pulls them into a cycle of negativity that benefits no one. Instead, they respond with a level of understanding that fosters peace rather than conflict. Smart people practice compassion in the way they communicate with toxic individuals as well. Instead of harshly criticizing or condemning, they engage with a calm and empathetic tone. They may choose to offer support or encouragement or simply set boundaries with kindness. This doesn't mean that they allow toxic behavior to continue unchecked, but it does mean that they approach the situation with respect and care. By doing so, they avoid adding fuel to the fire and instead create an environment where resolution is more likely to occur. Furthermore, practicing compassion involves recognizing that toxic people often don't have the tools or skills to manage their emotions in healthy ways. They may resort to manipulation, gaslighting, or aggressive behavior because they haven't been taught how to communicate their feelings or deal with conflict in a constructive manner. A smart person, aware of this dynamic, may choose to gently guide the conversation in a more positive direction, offering suggestions or alternatives that allow for growth and healing. Compassion also means being patient. Change is difficult, especially for those entrenched in toxic patterns. Smart people know that lasting change often requires time, self-reflection, and effort. Instead of immediately writing someone off as irredeemable, they allow for the possibility that growth is possible, even if it may not happen overnight. They practice patience by understanding that healing from toxicity is a journey, and while they may not always be able to influence or control the other person's progress, they can still offer kindness and encouragement along the way. In practicing compassion, smart people also extend this principle to themselves. They understand that they are not perfect and they don't hold themselves to unrealistic standards. If they make a mistake in how they handle a toxic situation, they forgive themselves and learn from it. They know that showing compassion toward themselves helps them model this behavior in their interactions with others. It reinforces the idea that everyone is worthy of understanding, growth, and second chances, including themselves. It's also important to note that compassion is not about accepting toxic behavior indefinitely. Smart people do not tolerate ongoing mistreatment, manipulation, or abuse. They practice compassion by setting firm boundaries and maintaining self-respect. However, they do so with understanding and kindness, not condemnation. They recognize that setting boundaries isn't about punishing the other person, but about protecting themselves and their peace. In this way, they can compassionately communicate their limits while maintaining their dignity and emotional well-being. By practicing compassion, smart people keep their hearts open without compromising their own needs. They don't take toxic behavior personally, nor do they allow it to affect their inner peace. Instead, they understand the dynamics at play and choose to respond with empathy. They recognize that by embracing compassion, they can navigate difficult relationships with grace and protect their energy while fostering a sense of healing for themselves and potentially for others. One of the most powerful and liberating decisions a person can make when dealing with toxic people is knowing when to walk away. Walking away is not a sign of weakness or failure, rather, it is a demonstration of strength, self-respect, and self-preservation. Smart people understand that they cannot change everyone or every situation, and they don't try to. They know when to recognize that the emotional, mental, or physical cost of remaining in a toxic dynamic outweighs any potential benefit. They understand that walking away is often the most loving thing they can do for themselves and for the toxic person as well. The decision to walk away from toxicity is not always easy. It can feel like a difficult and painful choice, especially when there is history involved, or when the person is a family member, close friend, or someone you care about deeply. However, smart people recognize that staying in a toxic relationship or environment often leads to further harm. They weigh the long-term consequences against the immediate discomfort of walking away and understand that by staying, they are doing themselves and others a disservice. Smart people are not afraid to walk away from relationships, friendships, or situations that continually drain their energy, self-worth, and peace of mind. They do not allow themselves to be held hostage by guilt, fear, or obligation. They know that their well-being is the top priority and that no one, no matter how close they are to them, is worth sacrificing their mental, emotional, or physical health for. Knowing when to walk away often comes from the wisdom gained through experience. Over time, smart people develop the ability to assess situations more accurately. They can sense when things are becoming unhealthy or when the dynamics of a relationship are toxic. They are not easily swayed by emotions or the need for validation from others. They trust their intuition, which tells them when enough is enough. It is also important to note that walking away is not the same as giving up or abandoning the person. It is not about abandoning the relationship, but rather about taking a step back to protect your own peace. Smart people understand that sometimes the best thing they can do for a toxic person is to distance themselves, especially when attempts to resolve the issue or change the dynamic have failed. Walking away can create the necessary space for both parties to reflect, heal, and grow independently. Smart people know that they do not need to engage in endless debates or try to convince the toxic individual to see things their way. They recognize that some people are simply not open to change, growth, or healthy communication. In these cases, trying to stay engaged in the relationship only leads to frustration, resentment, and emotional exhaustion. Walking away is a way to protect one's own sense of peace and dignity, while acknowledging that the other person's behavior is beyond their control. When smart people decide to walk away, they do so with grace and clarity. They do not need to announce their departure with a dramatic exit or harsh words. They simply choose to disengage, knowing that their peace of mind is worth more than any argument or confrontation. They may choose to have a conversation if necessary, explaining their decision in a calm and respectful manner, but they don't feel the need to justify their choice. Their actions speak for themselves. Knowing when to walk away also means recognizing when it is time to end a toxic pattern, even if it's not in a relationship with a person, but in a situation or environment. Smart people understand that a toxic work environment, a destructive social group, or an unhealthy habit can also require them to make the decision to walk away. They are not afraid to make changes that will ultimately benefit their long-term happiness and well-being, even if it feels difficult in the short term. They may choose to leave a job that doesn't align with their values, remove themselves from a social circle that is draining, or quit an activity that brings them more stress than joy. In these instances, walking away is not only a means of protection, but also a form of personal growth. The decision to walk away is also about acknowledging your own limitations. Smart people know that there are only so many things they can control in life, and people's behavior is not one of them. They don't waste time trying to fix or change people who are unwilling to change themselves. They accept that they cannot be everything to everyone, and sometimes walking away is the only way to preserve their own happiness. Moreover, walking away also allows for the opportunity to heal and grow. By removing themselves from toxic situations or relationships, smart people give themselves the space they need to reflect, reset, and move forward. This separation creates room for healthier connections, more positive experiences, and a stronger sense of self. It allows them to focus on their own goals and priorities without the constant distraction of toxicity. They understand that growth and transformation often require change, and walking away is an important part of that process. Smart people also recognize that by walking away, they create an example for others. While it may be difficult, their decision to leave a toxic situation may inspire others to do the same. By walking away, they show others that it is okay to prioritize your own well-being, and that setting boundaries is a sign of strength, not weakness. This act of self-respect can encourage others to make the same choice for their own lives.